Central to my work, I would say, is this concept of repetition and revision, like you have in jazz, for instance, where a conductor might ask to have a phrase played and then it's repeated. Or jungle music did this, or garage did this, where the music is then repeated, but then there's this kind of call and response also between the musician and the conductor, and also between the DJ and the audience. And what happens is these stackings are developed between this call and response, and the stackings never quite line up in the same way. So there's this way in which the repetition isn't ever quite a repetition. So even though I use a limited class of signs, these lips, tongues, and eyeballs, or wigs, flipped wigs, they're always hand-drawn. Even when they're printed the way, for instance, I'm printing the wall drawing that will exist in this exhibition, meaning it's a direct mark through a mediated material, either a printed kind of carbon paper or a loaded up sheet of ink. Or in the case of the black paintings, each sign is actually hand cut out of sheets of rubber. So the repetition itself isn't quite a repetition. There's always involved in each laying out, there's revision, there's always your hand, or there's always a gestural relationship to the repetition. So it's never a given where it will end up. And so through the stacking, these densities and gaps are created. And that's, for me, what's interesting to me. It's not the repetition itself, it's this disruption that happens in the repetition. And I think the painting Bling Bling, which is in this exhibition, shows that really well, where it's made by gluing from the beginning sheets of penmanship paper from top to bottom, left to right, which have also been glued into these bow forms, creating these arcs like you would find in old maps, or these sort of hemisphere forms. Onto that, then, I had imagined this very celestial Milky Way night sky. But as I began gluing these small bits of rubber that I'd hand cut, it's becoming more like a model of a city or something than it is becoming this ethereal night sky. So it's getting denser and denser, which was worrying. But I kept going and sealed the rubber and the paper with an black enamel skin. So when it was completely painted in this enamel skin, it went watery again and sort of appeared to be a kind of constellation underwater. And in this way, what I'm trying to get at is to talk about the centrifugal aspect of the grid, that the grid itself, unlike the grid of the 60s, which was more mute and meant to map the work of art itself, for instance, a Sol-LeWitt grid, which is meant to be about the thing itself. My grid is meant to refer to the grids of navigational charting or mapping, or to refer, to get to the centrifugal aspect of the grid, that the grid refers to the world outside of itself. And maybe that's also clear in the painting Double Natural, where again I've used a grid form, and this is actually my first measured grid. It's specifically a very measured grid, and I've collected archival material from black photojournals, starting from the 1930s, 1939, and going until 1972, and I'm looking at magazines like Our World, Sepia, and Ebony. I initially was attracted to the magazines because they are, the wig advertisements had a grid-like structure that attracted me, but as I began looking through them, the wig ads themselves had such a language to them that were so worldly, that referred to, other countries, or, La Shiba, or this sort of lost past. What I started doing was collecting the wig ads themselves, and then realizing that I also had a kind of longing for the other stories and narratives, and wanting to bring them back into the paintings, and wanting the paintings to kind of function through these characters of these wig ads to function as a kind of chart or a map of this lost world. The painting Psycho Alpha Disco Beta Bio Aqua Dulup references the title of a song written by George Clinton and Parliament Funkadelic, and also Detroit house band Drexciya, that sees themselves as channeling oral hallucinations from the Middle Passage. They imagine this Black Atlantis made up of women and children who went overboard during the Middle Passage, and it's this kind of militarized zone of this underwater sea world. In much of my work is this interest in this idea of, you know, the gigantic, but in a miniaturized form. Maybe in terms of the subject matter, which is, you know, sort of awful, and then reduced to a very minute observation of maybe a specific gesture or a specific narrative. But also in terms of the form, the way that these drawings are made, which is much like my version of Scrimshaw. And Scrimshaw was this carving into bone that sailors did as they were out whaling. I imagine them in this overwhelming, scary expanse, and then this kind of focus that would give you a sense of control, of being in control of something, and this kind of cutting as control. And the Scrimshaw basically had three genre forms. It was images of home, naked ladies, and images of whaling, the actual image of whaling. So much like Scrimshaw, I'm cutting directly into the thick stock of the watercolor paper, imagining this place, but this idea of home is more like this sort of constant return, you know, and the voyage itself becomes the kind of origin myth that I'm referring to. So the Middle Passage itself, rather than some version of an origin myth based on a Mother Africa. It's the passage itself, it's the concept of mutability that I think is the kind of origin myth that I'm referring to here, both in these drawings literally and more distantly in the paintings upstairs, specifically Double Natural. From the watery ecstatic drawings, which I began in 2001, I also started making a sequence of films called Murmur. And the first film called Watery Ecstatic, based on the watery ecstatic drawings, and it's the one that most literally refers to the drawings in terms of the way the paper is cut. And it's based on these sort of characters. It's sort of the moment overboard. And it's this marine mountain and the descent into Drexciya. The next film is Blizzard of White, which is claymation, and it's made with these tiny bits of plasticine. And for me, plasticine, which is also used in the paintings upstairs in Double Natural, is also meant to suggest, again, form and motion because it's used in claymation. And so even when I use it in a still painting, it's meant to suggest motion. It's always meant to suggest, in that sense, in the case of the painting, mutability or change, that something will then move from one place to another or shift. So in this instance, lots of little bits of white plasticine are formed into different sea creatures and descend again down into Drexciya, and so there's this black volcanic backdrawing scratched in graphite and ink, and so there's this continual descent downwards, and that's Blizzard of White. Superboo is made using ebony drawing, literally, and as the drawing is erased, scratched away, and the film moves across from Bruce Lee and Jim Kelly, these figures, and it's also based on this sort of musings of Lee Scratch Perry and Enter the Dragon. So you've got these figures of men in red sort of underwear that they're each set of warriors, and that's from the film. Also behind that is a borrowed loop from Dizzy Rascal. Often the work is read in terms of the signs primarily, and not so much in terms of the way the paintings are built, the way the signs exist within the form of the painting itself. So in this way, with this exhibition, I am trying to address that to some extent, to address that the signs are meant to be read not so much as static critique, but as generative, as something that can create new meanings.